Good evening, Mayor Dolan, Deputy Mayor Davidson, members of council, residents and park users tuned in online. I'm happy to be joined this evening by members of the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee, in addition to Nicole Bowman, your Operations Business Manager, Barry Vickers, our Chief Building Official and Manager of CDSB, and the many staff that have supported them in the recent weeks and months as we've ventured into these uncharted waters as they relate to our park, Innisfil Beach Park, and the, as you noted, your worship, the many parks up and down the shoreline of Lake Simcoe. As with every summer, Innisfil Beach Park is a topic of discussion amongst the community. But with the unique challenges presented by COVID-19 and the fact that Innisfil and the province remain in a declared state of emergency, there are some new questions being asked. We've heard from our residents, including those who participated in Sunday morning's demonstration, about the wide array of questions our residents do have. And while we've been rapidly shifting and pivoting to meet the health and safety protocols introduced by the province and the Chief Medical Officer, all of our planning and preparation work is done in consultation with the town's emergency control group. And this is the group that is managing the town-wide response to COVID-19. Many of these new questions have already been explored by the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee, as you noted. So we thought it best to hear from them and some updates from your staff as well. With tonight's presentation, we hope to address many of the questions that have been on the community's mind and provide reassurance that the town of Innisfil is well ahead of most other municipalities in terms of making the park the best it can be for our residents first. It's my pleasure to introduce Tanya Camperman-Martin, a public member from the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee. And accompanying Tanya is James Roncone, who's the Vice Chair of the IBP Ad Hoc Committee. I'll hand it over to Tanya and James to provide an update on the committee's great work to date.
Thank you, Jason. And good evening, Mayor Dolan and Council. As you may recall, our committee's mandate is to review issues surrounding Innisfil Beach Park and make recommendations to Council on these matters. How do we go about doing this? First, the committee explored various issues regarding Innisfil Beach Park and the user's experience. Next, we prioritized issues on an action item tracking list and discussed solutions. Then we recommended pilot projects and initiatives to Council. Our committee tackled and put in place measures to deal with some of the challenges listed here: parking, garbage, signage, boat launch, enforcement, overcrowding, revenue concerns, health and safety issues, and offshore boat parking. And that was just last year. Much more has been accomplished since the inception of this committee, and we've had the pleasure of working with individuals from across the municipality, representing residents, park users, the tourism sector, and members of Council. Details on the solutions that were put into place are all available on the town's website. Visit innisfil.ca and search IBP Ad Hoc Committee to review all the details. Now I'll turn it over to James to highlight some of our progress to date.
You're on mute, James. You're just gonna have to take yourself off mute first.
I'm a rookie. Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to highlight a few things that we've accomplished that came into our committee and then we passed on to Council and is actually implemented and working quite well in my opinion. We have the resident-only parking pilot, which is a 1 kilometer area around the beach. I live right down in the area that was always overtaken on weekends. It's working great in my opinion. The big one that we see this year is the boat launch improvements, including signage, resident-only parking, and the booking app. Another thing is the additional enforcement on weekends. Last year we started bringing in off-duty officers and private security, which we're continuing with this year. Also, a few new things that were planned for this year before the COVID. We have a beach wheelchair pilot project, and another one that everybody's really excited about is the Dog Days of Summer. And I have a big list here, but we won't go through that right now. But these are just a few things that I'd like to highlight that the committee has brought to Council, and it's been implemented, and working well.
Thanks, James. One topic the committee also looked at in some detail was making the park resident only. We had a fulsome discussion about whether it could be done, and while there's no doubt many of us would love to have a resident-only beach, we realized it just wasn't possible. The committee's discussions uncovered a number of challenges that would have significant impacts, including challenges for increased staff to enforce and essentially guard the park, challenges due to multiple entrances, a large fence or wall would need to be constructed and potentially patrolled by staff. A challenge because it didn't seem like the right thing to do. Residents would be allowed to visit other beaches, but we would not allow others to come visit our beach. A challenge because how do we decide who is a resident and who is a non-resident? Imagine you're an Innisfil resident, but your mom lives in Toronto and comes to visit. Can she come with you into the park? And of course, it didn't seem like it was in line with the spirit of being a welcoming community. The committee discussed this in great detail in September 2019, and the minutes presented to Council on October 9th, 2019 confirmed the committee's recommendation. I'll now pass over the rest of the presentation to Nicole Bowman from the operations team.
Thanks so much, Tanya, and to James, and to all of the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee for your thorough and thoughtful review of the issues pertaining to the park. I'd like to pick up the conversation from here and talk about what's being done in our parks to keep our community and our park guests safe. And this issue of safety is on everyone's mind, for our community, our loved ones, our friends, and it's on our minds too. So since the closure of our park amenities due to COVID-19, members of the operations team, in consultation with the emergency control group, have been forecasting, planning, consulting with others around the reopening of these beaches. So echoing the goals of the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit, we are striving for a plan that keeps our community and users of the park safe. And we do this by facilitating excellent physical distancing. So on our first and second weekends of reopening the beaches, we put more onus on the user to maintain physical distancing. And it worked in most areas of the park, except for the beach, right on the sand where we continued to see crowding. Now, this led to the decision to close the park for a few hours on both June 28th as well as on July 1st, as the overcrowding on the beaches was not in compliance with the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit recommendations around physical distancing. But last weekend, we introduced some new measures to deter crowding and maintain that physical distancing, as well as new enforcement measures. And as a result, we saw very positive outcomes at Innisfil Beach Park. It remained open throughout the hot, sunny weekend for all to enjoy. And in the next 3 slides, I'll show you some of these new measures. So the pinch point for crowding on the park is in the sand. And Jason, if I could just ask you to advance the slide one more. Perfect, thanks. The pinch point for crowding in the park is really right on the sand. Everyone loves being on the sand. It's the thing that connects us to the jewel of Innisfil, that being Lake Simcoe. But starting last weekend, people can still be on the sand, but they need to enjoy it while in motion. So it's now there for active play. So we can't bring our gear, our coolers, our umbrellas, the various things that you like to tote down to the beach, and sit down and sunbathe and all those other beachy activities. Instead, users are invited to do that in one of the 275 circles that have been painted on the grass just behind the sand. Instead, they're encouraged to stay active on the stand. It's great for your sandcastle play, throwing balls, footballs, frisbees, moving in and out of the water. And that's what we saw happening last weekend. If I could advance this slide. So here's the before and after. So before this tactic, we saw those tents and all the gear coming down, people lying in the space. And then afterwards, we saw a much more open space. We saw people moving fluidly in and out of that space and not creating that congestion. So we have these great sandy centers for active play. And we saw that after picture in the CTV News. You can also see in the bottom an example of a crowd using one of our circles painted on the grass. As a result, the park did not close on the account of overcrowding. So other means to reduce crowding. There are some other ways to do this, one of which is to remove other desirable amenities such as barbecues within the park. Another thing we tried was establishing max capacity for the spaces to help users self-determine whether they should be in them. This was posted at both the 9th and 10th line beaches. The numbers we do need to reevaluate, and that will be done in advance of this coming weekend, now that we've seen some of those numbers in the space. But it will help people to make better decisions. Most importantly, we have limited the parking capacity and given that limited parking capacity to residents. As for education and enforcement, we have some signs that will greet those entering Innisfil. You see our Curbex on the top right-hand side, billboard. There's about 10 of them all throughout the municipality at key entranceways. They remind guests coming in from out of town that parking at beaches and at boat launches is for Innisfil residents only. And the new sign on the left, you'll notice, this is now sitting at all of our park entrances at Innisfil Beach Park, the 10th line, as well as the 9th line, reminding people that their car may not be there when they get back, as we've implemented towing measures as well as ticketing. You'll notice the fine amount there that's subject to tonight's council discussion, and should it be approved, that number will be added to the sign to further demonstrate how serious we are about respecting the resident-only parking in the area surrounding the park. Now, in order to enforce and educate, we have a very collaborative group of people working together. There are 2 bylaw officers dedicated to Innisfil Beach Park all weekend. South Simcoe Police have been supportive and providing presence in the park. We've had hired security, which has been active and will continue to be active in the park each weekend, and have been very successful at gaining compliance for things like the beaches in motion and no barbecues in the park. And of course, our operations staff, which continue to educate guests about the expectations we have of them when they enter the park. And just to highlight some of the results, this photo is from the CTV news broadcast that aired last weekend. The good news, the park remained open with these new measures in place. Guests complied with the new measures mostly on their own. Again, security helped, but interestingly, we saw other guests prompting guests who perhaps were not choosing to sit in a circle or might have been toting a chair down to the sand that, hey, this is the new way we're doing things in Innisfil, grab a circle. And that was fascinating to see. Just to give you some numbers, there were 36 vehicles towed and 164 tickets issued just over that weekend. Again, our learnings from the park in this past weekend are already being applied at some of our other road ends and road end beaches. And lastly, I would just share that other municipalities have been calling us to ask about how we implemented these plans, as we seem to have set a bit of a new benchmark for facilitating the opening of beaches. So with that brief review, I'll pass it over to Jason Inwood.
Thank you, Nicole. And once again, thanks to James and Tanya for your continued support and dedication to making Innisfil Beach Park a better place for all users. Your worship and members of council, you've just heard a summary of all the hard work your staff and the ad hoc committee have put into making the experience of going to Innisfil Beach Park a safe and enjoyable experience for all. That said, we're still faced with significant pressures and challenges, and those pressures and challenges present us with the opportunity to continue to make the necessary adjustments as the circumstances change, innovate to address the needs of our community and park users, and continue to provide the key services our residents have come to expect. When you consider places like Trinity Beach in Toronto, pictured in the upper left, and the challenges in places closer to home, such as Wasaga Beach on the bottom left, those are both examples of what our efforts are attempting to prevent, as you can see in the photo on the upper right, just this past weekend, right here in Innisfil Beach Park. And as a reminder, we take our advice and direction from the Simcoe-Muskoka District Health Unit, who provide clearly defined guidelines on what are acceptable practices and policies to implement, and we continue to work collaboratively with them to ensure we deliver our services in the safest way possible. Further to much of tonight's discussion and the discussion on the weekend about a resident-only park, we have sought out a legal opinion as to whether this can even be done. And the advice we've received is that although the town has the authority under the Municipal Act to enact a bylaw preventing access to town parks and beaches by non-residents, there are a number of real legal risks involved in doing so that would open up such a bylaw to potential legal challenges, either with respect to Charter of Rights or the particularly daunting legal task of properly defining who the restriction applies to. And of course, in consultation with the Emergency Control Group, and as we continue to evolve our operations to meet the needs of the community and remain consistent with the direction from the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit, we are constantly monitoring and adjusting our plans, evaluating what the implications and unintended consequences are when we introduce tighter controls, such as pushing the problems from Innisfil Beach Park into our neighborhood parks and road ends, the effects on tourism and the impacts to our local economy, and the long-term impacts to initiatives such as our economic development branding strategy. We most certainly do not want to be coined as the town who tried to keep people out when we're working so hard to bring people in to boost our local economy with new businesses and new jobs. And as always, we welcome feedback from our residents and park users. Tell us your stories, share with us your experiences so we can learn from the users what works, what needs improvements, and how we can make everyone's experience a better one, even during a global pandemic. With that, Your Worship, we wrap up our presentation, and I wanted to thank yourself and members of council and everyone watching online for tuning in.